I want to commend both of you for starting Project Young Minds. It's just incredible to see Abhyuday's journey as well in terms of how far you've come. I remember seeing you as a 5 to 7 year old, and he would tag along with us when we're Global Shapers, especially after the earthquake in 2015 while we were volunteering. And it's great to see that spirit of sort of volunteering and learning about the world has continued. I'm very happy to meet you today, Nayantara, and to know that you're part of the Ashoka program. And I wish you all the best with whatever you choose to do in the future as well.
And we saw that you've worked across migrant community programs, sustainability, public affairs, and corporate leadership, right? So how do you describe the main thread that connects all of your work across these different sectors?
The running theme is really whatever I've done, I've tried to find a sense of purpose.
But right now, we're seeing that you're now actively involved in the private sector through public affairs, communications, and sustainability. Mm-hmm. So what experience or decision actually moved you from, say, non-profit and social service to more of a corporate leadership?
Me joining the private sector was a complete sort of accident. And in fact, it was a happy coincidence, I think. I never imagined I would work for any MNC. The fact that now I have resources locally, but then I also have access to resources from the Coca-Cola Foundation to try and make more positive impact in the community. I think that's a great opportunity, not only for us to do something, but then as one of the largest FMCGs in Nepal, when we do the work, in a way we're also setting the example of what others.
So you have led through many major transitions, such as the earthquake relief effort that I was also a part of, digital transitions in education, large-scale brands, and policy challenges. So, out of all these, which one do you think was the toughest phase?
And then you just have to believe that you're fighting for the right thing, right? And then they say that certain things you manifest as well. So in that sense, you have to stick it through and then see the other side. And it's only after reflecting on these, after all these years, that I realized that these challenges were such huge learning opportunities as well. Everything happened a little bit earlier than usual. And that sometimes, at least when I was younger, made me question a lot whether I deserve to be in the rooms or positions I was. I think the power of human connection, the power of understanding somebody who is different from you, I think that's really going to be the next superpower for Fulko Akhama by Ani Choing. I think the words really resonate, and it's really a great life philosophy. So
your advice on sustainability and taking it alongside or say hand in hand with private enterprises, I think was really eye-opening and offered a fresh new perspective that we wouldn't really think about as youths.
Can't tell you how proud I am that you're doing this. I think it gives me a lot of hope for the future for Nepal and the world when I see young minds like yourselves coming together to really, ask and inquire at this young age, because I think curiosity is another thing that will keep the world going. So very proud of you guys, and thank you so much for having me.
Hello, I'm Abhyuday.
And I'm Nayantara.
And we are the co-founders of Project Young Minds.
As a part of our nonprofit, we're starting a podcast series called The Leadership Seat with Abhyuday and Nayantara.
Like many other young people, we are still figuring out our passions, and our curiosity is what inspired us to start this podcast in the first place.
In this podcast, we talk with leaders from across Nepal about their journey.
We discuss their struggles, mistakes, and advice that they wish they had at our age.
We also discuss Nepal's current business landscape and the potential and opportunities for us youths in the future.
We do not have all the answers yet, and that's what makes it exciting.
If you're a student, a young person, or just feeling unsure about what comes next, this podcast is for you.
Hello, I'm Nayantara.
And I'm Abhyuday, and welcome back to the Leadership Seat. If you don't know us already, we are the co-founders of Project Young Minds, and as a part of our non-profit, we are making a podcast series called The Leadership Seat. This podcast's aim is for young people like us who are still figuring out what our passion is, and our curiosity is what inspired us to start this podcast to begin with.
In this podcast, we talk with leaders from across Nepal engaged in different industries to understand the opportunities and potential for us youths in the future.
Today, we have Ms. Sneh Rajbhandari with us, the Public Affairs, Communication and Sustainability Director at Coca-Cola Bottlers Nepal Limited.
Thanks so much for having me here, guys, today.
So, Ms. Sneh, before we planned about this podcast, we were researching about you a little bit, and we saw that you've worked across migrant community programs, sustainability, public affairs, and corporate leadership, right? So how do you describe the main thread that connects all of your work across these different sectors?
Thanks so much, Nayantara. And firstly, guys, I'm very happy to be here today. I want to commend both of you for starting Project Young Minds. And it means a lot to me that you considered me to come on to your podcast as well, to share a little bit of my experience with you guys. Before we start, and this is a little bit of a personal anecdote here, it's just incredible to see Abhyuday's journey as well in terms of how far you've come. I remember seeing you as a 5 to 7 year old, and he would tag along with us when we're Global Shapers, especially after the earthquake in 2015 while we were volunteering. And it's great to see that spirit of sort of volunteering and learning about the world has continued. And I'm very happy to meet you today, Nayantara, and to know that you're part of the Ashoka program. And I wish you all the best with whatever you choose to do in the future as well. Coming back to your question, right? I haven't had sort of a straight journey, if you think about it. I sometimes think I worked in the development sector and then pivoted to the private sector, right? And now I tell some of my friends and like family, maybe I should join the government, then I would have, touched upon all three key verticals. But that aside, whether I worked with the migrant community, whether I was looking at different sustainability programs, whether I look at my current role at Coca-Cola, I think the running theme is really whatever I've done, I've tried to find a sense of purpose and giving back to the community. I think that has always been very important to me from the very beginning. When I even left Nepal as an undergraduate student to go to the US, and I think I always knew that I wanted to come back to Nepal and work here. I think that was something that was a prime motivator for me always. And while I took business administration as like a degree to do, because we had a family business, I thought I'd come back and work in the family business. I was also always very curious about what was happening in the world, even back then, right? Just like how you said you started this podcast because of your curiosity in terms of, what the future holds. Back then, I was also 17 and heading out into the world. And when I went to the US, while I did my BA degree, I also thought I wanted to learn more about what is happening in the world. So then I took on political science. And that's how I stayed connected to the rest of the world and what's been happening as well. I think the other thing I always wanted to understand is there's different power dynamics in every community and society. And you always want to understand what factors help certain communities come up and what factors keep certain communities behind. So with the work that I try to do in the internal migrant communities that I worked in, while these were communities that were excluded from regular social fabric from the day-to-day, in some ways they were the most important people doing all the hard work, right? They're doing work as cleaners, they're doing work as peons in government, and I just wanted to learn from them because I had come back after, I think 6 years I was abroad, and then I'd come back to Nepal. So instead of working in a large organization, I really wanted to understand what the grassroots mindset of Nepalis was. And so I came back and worked in the migrant community and really tried to understand what an average Nepali thought and felt at the time. And I think that was an extremely humbling experience for me as well.
So you gave hints about this in your previous answer just now.
Mm-hmm.
So you have worked across many social services and even co-founded Included Nepal.
Mm-hmm.
So how has these experiences shaped you of how you understand inequality and development in Nepal itself?
When I did my master's, I did a degree in development management. And during that degree, right, they tell all of us the whole philosophy of working in the development sector is to do no harm. So I knew that when I came back to Nepal, I knew that again, as I shared before, I wanted to work in the grassroots because I think that was the best way for me to understand my country after having lived away for so long. Sometimes working in large organizations gives you bigger platforms at a young age, but then you end up being sort of more inside closed offices, or you're doing more secondary research. But what I wanted was that direct exposure, connecting with people. and understanding what their needs are, what their challenges are as well. When working with included, I mean, when you listen to the name itself, right? We wanted to try to include communities that are otherwise excluded from services and other opportunities that their families might have. I think what I saw is, so Nepal at that time, and actually Kathmandu Valley at the time, had more than 65 slums and squatter settlements already. And most of these were by the riverside as well. So firstly, I think the difference you would see is in the quality of the housing infrastructure already, right? Limited infrastructure. And I sense that these communities always lived in the constant threat that any day they could be displaced. The other thing I saw is that while these families lived in extremely difficult circumstances, they paid more for electricity than even in any other formal household in Kathmandu. So, for example, if the per unit cost of electricity for an average household back then was about 7 to 8 rupees per unit, these families were paying 12 to 13 rupees per unit. So the cost of service, cost of opportunity for these families was a lot higher when the affordability was even more difficult. So even in terms of what services they received from the government or from the local community, I saw a disparity there. The other thing is actually you think, some people might think, oh, why did these families move? Like they must have some home back in their village. But a lot of these communities migrated during the Maoist civil war and they had to escape, right? Everyone first and foremost wants to protect their family. So they had to escape the conflict in their own districts, and then they had come to Nepal. And very interesting, Manohara community where I used to work had people from about 70 districts of the country. So it was really like a mini Nepal and a mini Nepal coming together. And there I understood that it was very interesting. While in some ways they were excluded, in other ways there were also certain people living in these communities that were also very well connected with the political leadership. So that dichotomy was very interesting to me because there were definitely people who were struggling and working hard there. But there were definitely some people there who were also very connected with the political center. And that I found fascinating, that everywhere there's a negotiation of how power and influence comes in. And in some ways, these communities were also protected because of these leaders. In some ways, they were also treated or mistreated because of the perception of influence. So working with them was an incredible experience. One thing I do want to share, I know I've shared quite a bit here, is that something that really impacted me working in these communities is the Paurakhi Basti is the one that was the UN Park community, which is actually very close to where I live. And one morning I got a phone call saying that, that entire community has been surrounded by police and they're going to basically destroy that entire community. There was no warning to that community that day. There were bulldozers that arrived. And because I lived nearby, I just took a camera and ran in, right? Like I lived in Thapathali, so I went in. And because I had a camera, I think people assumed I was media, so they let me enter. But after me, nobody from outside was allowed in. And so for 6 hours, I saw that entire community get demolished, one after the other. And I think that day I realized how insecure we could be as well. And I documented everything. But for the next 3 months, and this was rainy season, this happened in May and then rainy season started. But for the next 3 months, every time it rained, I realized these communities had no shelter, no cover. Everything they had was all under the rubble. They tried to salvage whatever paperwork they could, but everything else was gone, right? And so that's, I think, the real inequality, the fact that as Nepali people, they were not even given an opportunity to sort of pick up their valuables to move it out. Suddenly there was a decision and it was imposed. And that's the dynamic that I think is quite unfair, actually. And it's so incredible to see how this community eventually built back. But that's something that'll always stay in my mind. May 8th, 2012, if I remember correctly. Yeah.
It seems as though you had such a strong sense of purpose in order to, say, get into social welfare and public welfare, right? Mm-hmm. But right now we're seeing that you're now actively involved in the private sector through public affairs, communications, and sustainability. Mm-hmm. So what experience or decision actually moved you from, say, nonprofit and social service to more of a corporate leadership?
Yeah. This is a great question, Nayantara, and I think it's one that I still try and sort of reflect on myself when I try and think of how to connect my dots, right? So 2015, we all know we had the earthquake. I think in 2015, while I had the opportunity to do a lot of volunteer work through the Global Shapers Community, I think that crisis also made me feel like there's always an opportunity for all of us to rise beyond whatever problems that are in front of us, right? And I think at that time I was quite blessed because there were so many like-minded people around us who felt like we should come together and do something. And instead of just kind of feeling like this has happened to us and, you know, we're victims, we kind of turned around the narrative and came together as a Global Shapers community at that time. But while that work was really motivating and sort of gave me a lot of fire, by then it had been almost 5 years since I was working in the development sector. And the vision for Included was actually that over a period of time that we would not be needed as an NGO, right? We wanted to empower the communities we were working with, and over time we wanted to be obsolete. But what I also observed what was happening, especially after the earthquake, one, there was like displacement all around me. And I think personally also it was starting to become a lot, one. But two, what I also felt like is that the more grants came in, the more funding came in, the more programs we did, unintentionally, we were creating more dependency structures for the very families that we were trying to help empower. And I think that somewhere just did not sit right with me. So that was one trigger for me to start looking at other opportunities. The second was, I think, when, especially when you're working with an NGO, not even a large INGO, I think it's so easy to sit outside and complain and be like, oh, private sector has the money and resources and they're not doing anything, right? Me joining the private sector was a complete sort of accident. And in fact, it was a happy coincidence, I think. I never imagined I would work for any MNC. But even for that, I think I give a lot of credit to the work we did through Global Shapers. So I'll tell you the story of how I even was considered for the role for joining Coca-Cola. Through Global Shapers, we had reconstructed a health post in Sindupalchok, Tipeni. And there used to be a Coca-Cola Shaping a Better Future grant. So as Shapers, we had applied to try and complete that health post. So we had applied for that grant together. And because I was the curator then, I went to Geneva to do like a 90-second pitch for that. And then once we did the pitch, instead of that 10,000 euros or something that was committed to maybe 5 projects, we actually managed to win 20,000 because they were quite moved by the impact of the project as well. And so when I came back from Geneva, that was the first time I met somebody from Coca-Cola. Mr. Alok Kohli was the country director at the time. And then our founding curator, Ashmi Dirju, and then also and I went to meet him because he wanted to hand over that gift to us. And it was during a conversation like this, like the one you and I are having, is when he asked, oh, what are you doing? And I had just transitioned out of my role at Included. And he told me about this role that Coca-Cola has called Public Affairs, Communications and Sustainability. And I was quite curious about what this role meant. And he told me that this is more about how Coca-Cola tries to make a difference in the world and tries to do all of the community and sustainability projects. And so from that is where it started the conversation for that potential role. And as you rightly pointed out, I was quite nervous actually because Coca-Cola was a very large organization and I was used to working in a very small grassroots organization as well. But then after several rounds of interviews, finally I think made the cut. Actually, I was told I didn't make the cut, but my response to not making the cut made me get the job again because they realized there was a maturity in which I could handle receiving bad news, essentially. And that's how I transitioned to this sector. And the other thing I realized is often private sector is painted as like, the one that never does enough. And the one thing that I'm very proud of in terms of the work that we do at Coca-Cola is that actually we do quite a lot, but we don't even talk about it because I feel like the work needs to speak for itself. And I can share more about sort of the work that we do through Coca-Cola later, but the fact that now I have resources locally, but then I also have access to resources from the Coca-Cola Foundation to try and make more positive impact in the community. I think that's a great opportunity, not only for us to do something, but then as one of the largest FMCGs in Nepal, when we do the work, in a way, we're also setting the example of what others can do, right? So we're always very open to collaborating with other private entities and also the industry association. So I always believe in collaborating and amplifying the impact of the work. And so I'm very grateful that through this platform, I'm able to do that.
Wow, very inspiring. So you have led through many major transitions, such as the earthquake relief effort that I was also a part of, digital transitions in education, large-scale brands, and policy challenges. So, out of all these, which one do you think was the toughest phase in your journey, and how did you navigate through it?
That's a tough question. I think every challenge, when you face it for the first time, feels difficult, right? Because you're seeing it for the first time. But like I said before, every challenge and every crisis offers an opportunity for all of us to rise above. And when I look at all the challenges, when the earthquake happened, we were in the middle of it. I don't think I really processed how it had affected me until much later. I remember, so after the earthquake, earthquake happened, and then in a couple of weeks' time, actually, my grandmother also passed away. But we were doing so much work as a community that, I just kind of buried myself in the work we were doing. And it was only maybe a year later, when I was doing something else in Ladakh, another voluntary experience, that I fully processed that loss. And I think I probably cried for the first time more than a year and 1 month after the earthquake, because all that stress was sort of compiling up and, kind of pent up inside me. But it was only after a year or so that I managed to realize how much stress we were under. I think the earthquake is something that for all Nepalis, not just for me, right? It was one of the most stressful things we went through. But during that time, we also saw a lot of hope. We saw all young people come together. Young people didn't wait for anyone to tell them what to do, actually. Everyone came together and did the best. And I think because of that effort, also managed to save a lot of lives and also played a critical role before, let's say, all the experts, came in. And, so the earthquake taught me a lot, of course. But besides that, some of these other things that I do, whether it's at Coca-Cola from a policy point of view, or even when I was working in Included and when that community got completely destroyed, I think I realized that sometimes you just have to stick it through and try and see the light at the end of the tunnel. Sometimes things will not go the way we want it to, but we have to have a lot of patience, a lot of grit, and then you just have to believe that you're fighting for the right thing, right? And then they say that certain things you manifest as well. So in that sense, you have to stick it through and then see the other side. And it's only after reflecting on these, after all these years, that I realized that these challenges were such huge learning opportunities as well. So, yeah, I think I'm grateful in some ways for all the challenges that we faced. But during this time, the most important is, again, sort of the support system you have, whether it's through your friends or the community like I had with the Global Shapers community. I think when you have like-minded people around you, pushing you to do better, I think there's no other option but to do your best and hope for the best.
If I remember correctly, I was 6 or 7 years old in that time.
Probably, maybe 6 or 7. Yeah, this is 10 years ago. So
Yeah,
yes, yeah.
that was 10 years ago.
Yeah.
So, Sneh, you just talked about support systems, right? And how it's crucial to have such systems in your life. Now, one thing we know and we constantly see about you is you being an encouraging factors for businesses in Nepal to actually play a stronger role in sustainability and climate resistance, right? So what do you think the private sector, especially here in Nepal, still misunderstands about its responsibility in social impact?
So as of now, because of the role that I'm in Coca-Cola, I've had a chance to embed myself in different industry associations. So whether you look at like CNI or FNCCI, and even the American Chamber. And then now we've just started the Food and Beverage Association as well, right? I would say, like I said before, I often feel like the private sector is misunderstood, or maybe somewhere the mindset in Nepal is to not fully understand the kind of effort it takes to run a business. So right now, let's not even think about large organizations like Coca-Cola. Like every small entrepreneur in Nepal, right? Anybody who decides to do something on their own, I think we forget how much they're sacrificing to set that up. So any business in Nepal, big or small, the first thing that they do, they're employing people, right? That's something we forget. Employment is something that's so necessary. Then there's different ways, right? That people are paying taxes. Then there's always a ripple effect of what that creates in the economy. So what I wanted to start off by saying is that I think somewhere people think that private sector does not want to do the right thing. And personally, from my work and my experience and what I've seen, at least in the larger corporates, and also in companies that have established themselves already, I think everybody wants to try and do the best and try and really do good for the community. Because everybody realizes, right, without the community succeeding, a business does not succeed. If there's no market, what's the point of having any business, as an example? So firstly, I think I want to just get rid of that misnomer that private sector maybe still misunderstands. I think private sector realizes the value of doing business responsibly and with sort of the intent to be sustainable as well, especially in this day and age. But what's been challenging is that often people who try and do things responsibly, they have to bear a larger burden of the cost as well. See, everything is a cost in the end, right, when you run a business. And if it's your personal investment especially, you have to take a call on what you want to prioritize first, second, third. I think Nepal, we're still in sort of our nascent stages of whether you look at industrialization, whether you look at growing scales of business. So I think it's a bit unfair that for our businesses, we've kind of had to do everything much faster than everywhere else in the world. Everywhere else in the world, they had hundreds of years to do and learn from whatever they did. And then now they're focused on sustainability, right? But for a lot of businesses here, I think 30, 40 years of, having been in business, and immediately we're having to invest in doing things the right way. And I think a lot of people are trying to do that, but we need a lot more policy alignment from the government as well. This is an area, that's why I think I enjoy the work in terms of what I do. I was joking earlier when I talked about working in government, but I realized you don't even have to work in government. If we can build strong partnerships between private sector and government, we can get policies to be win-win. Sometimes when there's policies that private sector cannot implement, it's not going to succeed, right? But if we figure out a way to develop policies in a way that private sector can also implement, maybe they're also incentivized a little bit, at least early on, so that everyone can begin to make the shift towards looking at greener transitions. Then I think we can build a win-win. So I always want to work in this space I call golden triangle of empowerment. We always need the experts from civil society to guide private sector and government to make the right decisions. So I think this is why this is a space I enjoy working in. And already in the last 3 years, I've seen tremendous progress. And I also feel like when you present the case through evidence, even the government bureaucrats and government leaders listen and want to try and do the right thing. So I'm actually personally quite optimistic about the way forward in this space.
So we couldn't help but notice that you've worked across many sectors and communities such as the grassroots communities, global forums, industry alliance, and senior corporate teams. So how has your understanding of leadership evolved as you moved across different sectors?
At this point, I think I'm still figuring it out and navigating it. One thing I realized, right, I did everything early in some ways, and there's both good and bad to it. So, for example, I finished high school, and then before I turned 18 was already starting my undergrad. Did 4 years of undergrad and straight went into my master's, which means by the time I was 21, or just about entering 22, I was already done with my master's. And so then I entered the workforce early, right? Started, or everything happened a little bit earlier than usual. And that sometimes, at least when I was younger, made me question a lot whether I deserved to be in the rooms or positions I was early on in my career. So this in my 20s, I think a lot of times whenever I got these opportunities, I mean, there are so many opportunities for leadership, right? Even, for example, being the curator of the Global Shapers Hub was a leadership opportunity. Leading the program for Included in Nepal was a leadership opportunity. I did the work, but I always questioned, was I the right person for that back then? But something, and this is kind of maybe unsolicited advice for young people, I would say, sometimes we tend to overthink and question whether, we are meant to do certain things or not. But I think if you're there, it's because you're meant to be. And sometimes you might not see it in that moment, but over time, when you reflect, you'll see the kind of impact and power you have as well, right? So I think for me, my style of leadership has always been a little bit more from behind. I don't know how else to explain it, but from behind. So as an example, even now, because you keep saying I'm a corporate leader and all of that, I don't see myself as that, right? But from my team, I always want to lead from behind and push them forward, for example. Because if my team does well, then I feel like I do well and my organization does well. So that's kind of always been my leadership sort of philosophy. Before this, I also worked with an IT design company as well, which I'm still a part of. And even there, I saw so much creativity and passion in a lot of the teams. Other ways I try to encourage them is like, even if they're applying for like masters or even if they're applying for like other studies or other job opportunities, I always believe in paying it forward, especially if these are like qualified, talented young people trying to sort of do different things, explore new things. So most people would count on me, even if it's for references or even to help write essays, all of that. And by luck, since I went to LSE, I also managed that alumni chapter. So whenever someone's going to LSE, we always try and connect. And in some ways, I think when you keep an open mind as a leader, that you can always learn from people younger than you. And in fact, if you hire somebody better than you have to do less work as well, right? So that's been my theory. And that's been the leadership style of kind of pushing from behind so that, other people progress. And with that, you can also showcase your own work. Yeah.
Thank you, Sneh. Now, because this is a youth-centered podcast, right? We know that many young people in Nepal want to work in social impact while also building a career in the private sector. So what skills do you think we as students or we as young people should start building early if they want to work where, say, purpose and business meet?
Nowadays, I really feel like young people these days have so much exposure as well. And I'm always inspired, actually, whenever I meet a young person, right? I feel like there's so much to learn from them. One thing I think that we really need to cultivate, and this is for probably young people all across the world, I think kindness goes a long way. It's not really a hard skill set. It's something that I think you have to develop over time as well. I think the future of this world is all about the emotional quotient, EQ. Right now, because of technology, because of AI, I think like we have information and we have everything at our fingertips, right? But I think the power of human connection, the power of understanding somebody who is different from you, I think that's really going to be the next superpower for all of us, and hopefully maybe even for humanity if you think about it. So I think my biggest takeaway, and this is probably learnings from what I saw from my grandmother, my grandparents, and then my parents now, and then this is something that I want to impart to whoever is listening to us, I guess, is I think kindness is something that is so important. Be kind. Try and always understand the other person's perspective before reacting. Try to respond with kindness and patience. The other thing is I think we're rapidly living in a very interconnected world, right? So now there's almost no difference between a Gen Z growing up here and a Gen Z growing up in Mexico and, wherever else in the world. And so as we live in this like really interconnected world, I think it's also important to continue to stay open and non-judgmental as well. So I think if we can cultivate empathy at a young age, value everyone's lives as being equal, I think there's a lot that we can accomplish together, not just for humanity, but also in terms of what you said about building like a greener earth for the future as well.
Thank you, Sneh Rajbhandari, for your advice. So what is one honest and direct advice that you would give your 17-year-old self if she was sitting where we are sitting right now?
I would say believe in yourself, believe in the power that you hold as well. Believe in how, your intention really sort of defines what you do and how you do it and its impact. And this, I think, comes from a place of, I sense a lot of my young niece, for example, right now, she's 17. And sometimes I feel like the way she's expressing herself, she's inherited some of our imposter syndrome as well. But I want to tell her that if you believe in yourself and if you believe that what you're doing is the right thing for, not just for you, but for a larger group of people, I think it'll be good. And this is something that I've shared many times before. When I graduated from college, one of the president of my university, he always said, go out into the world and do well, but more importantly, go out into the world and do good. So that's my strongest advice. So as you guys are exploring university and college and going out into the world, there's so much to learn, so much to do, but always try and see what good you can leave behind wherever you go.
Thank you so much for that, Sneh. Now, before we end this podcast, we wanted to ask you some fun questions so that, say, we could end this podcast in a lighter mood, right? So the first fun question we have for today is what your favorite song is.
Wow. I think the fun questions are more difficult at this point. My favorite song. There's so many, but right now just what comes off the top of my mind is Fulko Akhama by Ani Choing. I think the words really resonate and it's really a great life philosophy. So Fulko Akhama by Ani Choing.
And it's a very popular song.
Yes.
It's also a very old song.
Thanks for making me feel old, Abhyuday, but thank you.
Yes. So what do you do in your free time? Like, do you have any hobbies or interests that you do?
Yeah, I love dancing. Love dancing. I wish I had more time for it. And I used to play a lot of basketball and football, but now that I have an injury, I can't do that as much. So I've been trying to do a bit of yoga. So I do Surya Namaskars. Again, as I say this, I feel like I sound like a very old person, but trust the power of yoga. It's revolutionary and it's not as easy as it looks. And I also really love just spending time with like my friends and family, who I prioritize a lot more. So dancing, team sports, and just spending time with loved ones. Yeah.
By any chance, do you watch any football?
I used to. I don't have as much time as I used to. So I used to watch all of EPL, everything. Arsenal is my favorite team, right? And I'm really looking forward to FIFA as well this year coming up. I watch all those matches, even if it's at night, any time of the day. Yeah.
And we know that you travel around a lot, right? So what's your favorite destination that you've been to?
Oh my God, this is a difficult question. I told you the fun part is much harder, I think. So I can't just limit it to just one place. I think one really magical experience was this trip that we did to Ladakh, where we solar electrified a 2,500-year-old monastery in Fukhtar. Fukhtar means Cave of Enlightenment. So, that trip is one that I will never forget. And another trip that's a major highlight is going to the base camp of Nanga Parbat in Fairy Meadows in Pakistan. I think that was also incredibly difficult to get to, but we made it there. That's actually one of the mountains, I think, that has not been summited ever. But we just made it to the base camp, of course, right? We're amateurs, so we just made it to the base camp. So that was another good one. But And the third one, actually, these are all more recent trips. So the third one would be walking with the guerrillas in Rwanda. I remember walking with the Susa family, and that experience was really something. And I think on that note, I also feel like there's a lot Nepal can learn from Rwanda in terms of sustainable tourism. And I came back really inspired from that trip as well.
Wow. So, pretty much piggybacking off the previous question. So, since you've traveled to many places, what's your favorite cuisine from?
Newari cuisine. Best food is made at home.
All right. Thank you so much for today, Sneh. I feel like we learned a lot from, say, having you in this podcast. Your advice on sustainability and taking it alongside or, say, hand in hand with private enterprises, I think was really eye-opening and offered a fresh new perspective that we wouldn't really think about as youths right now, right? So thank you so much for that.
Thank you so much, guys, for having me. And I can't tell you how proud I am that you're doing this. I think it gives me a lot of hope for the future for Nepal and the world when I see young minds like yourselves coming together to really, ask and inquire at this young age. Because I think curiosity is another thing that will keep the world going. So very proud of you guys, and thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Sneh, and thank you all for listening to our podcast, The Leadership Seat with Abhyuday and Nayantara, and I will see you on the next one.
A special thank you to Prime College for supporting us and Monoldi for guiding us throughout.
Thank you.